You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 241. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Episode 241 of the podcast. How are you? Today, we are diving into a critical component of the ADHD experience that, quite frankly, I completely overlooked when I first got my diagnosis. In fact, it took me several years to really understand the impact of this obstacle on my life, both personally and professionally. And to put it into context, I first want to share a little bit about what it looked like for me. And then we're going to dive into what the key component is and where we can begin supporting ourselves through it. So with all of that in mind, I first want to ask you this. At the end of the day, how often do you find yourself staring at your unfinished to-do list, completely overwhelmed, and kind of wondering where on earth the day went? Maybe you think you should have gotten more done. Maybe you are really overwhelmed thinking about all that there is left to do. And you're like, when am I going to get this done? And why didn't I get as much done as I had planned to do when I mapped out my day? I mean, it's all right there on the schedule. It all fits. So why isn't this working? In fact, if you've been thinking about the time blindness component that I'm always talking about on the podcast, right? Maybe you're even intentionally leaving yourself that extra time to complete some of those tasks. And you're thinking, okay, I know that I have this time blindness. I'm even going to leave some extra space. But still, for whatever reason, you're maybe halfway through that list by the end of the day, and it just doesn't add up. What is going on? It should math out. If this is happening to you all too often, please know first and foremost that I see you. Believe me, I get it. This was the story of my life for years. Again, even after I found all the effective strategies that really do work for my brain, and I was better able to stay focused on my tasks and move through that overwhelm and take that big project and make a supportive plan and break it down into steps. Even with all of that, I would still constantly be behind on the plans that I made. And it seemed like every 2 things that I would manage to check off the list, 7 new things would appear from somewhere. And I just felt like I was drowning. Time kept slipping through the cracks. I could never get ahead. And I was so frustrated. And as I mentioned, this was especially frustrating for me when I was undiagnosed, because at that time, I didn't realize that I needed different supports. I didn't know that I needed a different way to work with my brain. So I just kept shooting on myself. I just kept questioning why I couldn't get the traditional productivity methods to work, right? I should, quote unquote, just keep trying harder. I kept buying new planners and trying different productivity approaches, things that, quote unquote, promise to revolutionize my output or make me so much more efficient. But the reality is, I would dive in. I'd force myself into this neurotypical approach of productivity for 2, maybe 3 days. I'd be pushing myself, forcing myself to make it work. And then usually, sooner rather than later, I'd find that it just wasn't supportive for me at all. But because I didn't have a diagnosis, I didn't know I had ADHD, I would just blame myself because I wasn't trying hard enough or I didn't have enough willpower. And then I'd be off on the next hunt for the next productivity solution that would, quote unquote, fix me. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm not the only one who has a similar story to this. I know a lot of people within our Busy Awesome community are, frankly, just truly remarkable brains. I mean, we challenge ourselves to grow. We go all in. We make things happen. We are determined. We are resilient. And we usually have something to show for it. Usually we have created some pretty awesome success for ourselves in 1 or 2 areas of our lives. But the challenge is that if we don't have the proper tools and supports in place, we have had to force ourselves to work at least 10 times harder than everyone else. And as we explored in my episode on ADHD burnout, which I will link to in the show notes, this constant overdoing and overworking, it really takes a toll. Several months ago, I sent out an email to my email list and I shared this powerful observation that one of my new clients at the time had mentioned. So we just started working together and she was reflecting on her work and what she's created in her life and where she was in her career. And she said, I have gotten to this place and I'm really proud of it, but also I am so sick of living this one-dimensional life. She had created incredible success in her career, but it really came at a steep cost. And in order to maintain that success, she had to focus the majority of her time and attention on that one dimension, on her work. So not surprisingly, it left her feeling super burnt out and exhausted and questioning whether she even wanted to stay in this career that she worked so hard to create. And I think that this is a really familiar experience for many of us in the busy, awesome community, especially prior to getting a diagnosis, prior to learning that our brain needs different supports. Now, for myself, after getting the diagnosis, I did feel like things finally started making more sense. But it wasn't an immediate flip of the switch, okay? And if you don't feel immediate joy or happiness or relief or whatever you may hear other people talk about when you get a diagnosis, please know you're not alone. I mean, after working with hundreds of ADHD brains over the years, one thing that I know to be true is that we all have a very different experience with the diagnosis process. We all have different emotional responses. Some of us feel incredible relief. Some of us feel a lot of grief. Some of us feel incredible anger about what could have been or should have been if we would have been seen and had the right supports. Some of us experience a lot more clarity around things that happened in the past and we go, oh my gosh, that's why. Or we understand better now why things were challenging then or why they're challenging today, why these areas that are seemingly quote unquote simple to one person are quite challenging for us. And maybe you've had a similar experience to me where you may have also felt a lot of uncertainty and doubt around the diagnosis itself. There was quite a while when I really kind of resisted accepting the diagnosis because I so strongly believed that it was just me and I wasn't trying hard enough, that I just needed to push a bit more. I mean, it was such a well-worn belief in my mind that what I had was an effort and willpower problem. And because of that, it was very challenging for my brain to believe that it could be something else other than the fact that I'm the one with the problem, that I just don't have enough willpower to stick with it, which I can laugh about now because that's such a classic example of inflexible thinking that our ADHD brains are known for. So I offer this context and I kind of share my own experience just to say that if you've been through the diagnosis process or you're contemplating doing so, you've probably also experienced a wide range of emotions and thoughts about the process itself, about what it means to have ADHD. And please know that wherever you are on this journey and whatever your experience is with the process, you're doing it exactly right because there is no specific response that one quote unquote should have to getting an ADHD diagnosis. All of us are going to experience this a little bit differently. And like I said, for myself, I did feel quite a bit of doubt and skepticism as I questioned whether this could actually be true, that there might be a reason why things felt so much harder for me other than, well, you just simply need to try harder or care more. But once I did create that acceptance of the diagnosis and acceptance of myself and the way my brain worked, I did feel tremendous relief in the diagnosis process. I mean, it was this huge weight that was lifted off my shoulders because I realized there were so many very valid reasons why these areas of my life that were so seemingly simple for everyone else were such a huge challenge for me. And because I am a researcher and learner by nature, I dove into the literature and I learned so much more about how the ADHD brain worked. And I started redesigning all the productivity tools and approaches so they actually worked for my brain. And I began putting in all these supports to help me reduce the demand of my executive function so that my brain wasn't so taxed day in and day out. It allowed me to have the energy to pursue the work that I genuinely wanted to do because it wasn't draining my battery doing all of these heavy executive functioning tasks all day long. I learned how to create the systems to really streamline my workflow. So I wasn't creating a bunch of what I talk about in episode 167, all about attention residue, right? I wasn't creating all of that unnecessary attention residue. And I learned how to set up my environment and work with my brain so that I could prioritize what matters and stay focused on those projects and those tasks that actually move the needle forward. As a throwback to last week's episode, I learned how to focus on the 20% that created the 80% of my results so much more often. Now, with all of that being said, despite putting all of this powerful scaffolding in place, there was one sneaky area that often evaded all of these supports. There was this missing piece that still had me overcommitting and constantly thinking that I was behind. This one area really had me feeling like I could never keep up. So what was this? What was this sneaky area that had me so stuck? It was transition time, which shows up in so many different ways. And in fact, I think it shows up differently depending on the different stage of our ADHD journey, which is also why I think it evaded me for so long. And here's what I mean by that. The initial obstacle of transition time is what I frustratingly labeled as procrastination, both prior to my diagnosis and when I was first developing a deeper understanding of what it meant to have an ADHD brain. Anytime I wasn't doing what I had planned, I labeled it as procrastination. And I adopted this identity of, I guess I'm someone who procrastinates. And I got so frustrated with myself, especially after I first learned about the diagnosis, because I couldn't, quote unquote, figure it out. Why can't I just stop procrastinating? And then I started learning some things. I realized, oh, hold on. This project is too big. My brain needs some steps. It needs me to break down this big project into smaller steps. I can't just put in my schedule on Thursday at 11, write article. That is not effective. My brain has no idea what to do with that. It is one giant step when in reality, this could be months of work. So I figured out those supports. I figured out that what my brain needed in those moments of transition was a way to break down that project and give myself direction. And that helped a lot. That really helped with this area that my brain was labeling as procrastination. I mean, we could still use that label if we want to, but also my brain just didn't have the on-ramp. It didn't have the supports to get started because the project was too big. But even after I figured that part out, I would still find myself stuck. I'd still find myself thinking, where the heck did the time go? I don't understand why I can't get all the things that I've time blocked on my schedule checked off. I've even left extra time for myself. I even tripled the time like I know I need to because I'm super time blind. What gives? What is in the way? Why am I still so far behind in my schedule at the end of the day? And again, I would get so frustrated. I'd be thinking this shouldn't be so hard. Why can't I just get started and do the thing? This shouldn't take me so long. What is wrong with me? And because I didn't know how to handle all the shame and the frustration that I felt, and because I didn't know how to regulate my emotions in a supportive way, I just kind of escaped all those bad feelings by jumping down the rabbit hole of distraction with procrastinating or Instagram scrolling or buying stuff on Amazon I didn't need. But then, as I continued my work, I got more curious. And I asked myself, okay, hold on. It's not like you're not trying here. There's something going on. What is it? What do we think is going on here? Do we see any patterns? Where's the friction? You have the tools, you have the supports, you're even using them. So what's up? And I realized that even though I was using the tools to help me break down big projects into smaller steps, that's not the only time where transitions were a big problem for me. It turns out that transition time basically tripped me up constantly anytime I was moving from one thing to the next. It was incredibly challenging for me to, for example, shift from teaching a workshop or leading a big group coaching call into outlining my podcast. My brain had a real hard time with that. Or I might take a break for lunch and I'd feel so much resistance to returning after eating and writing my newsletter or mapping out the next workbook I wanted to create. Even if I had all the steps broken out and I knew what I wanted to do, there was still this hurdle to get started. And because I have spent years learning how to slowly drop the judgment of myself and instead get into curiosity. Okay, so again, I've already mentioned some of the judgments I used to have all the time, and it has been years of process. So please hear me when I say that. This is not an overnight process. It does take time. Okay, it's something I still return to in terms of practicing dropping the judgment. But because I have spent years learning how to release that judgment and shift into curiosity much more often, I realized that this challenge of transition is not only in needing to break down the steps to support myself to get into action, but I also need literal transition time. I need the time. I need time to get myself regulated and to help my brain shift into a new mode of focus and activation. Okay? Our brains need literal time to make this shift. And it's so important to hear this. Because, in fact, what I am saying is true for all human brains, ADHD or not. All human brains need transition time. We all do. And people with ADHD and ADHD tendencies, we need likely even more transition time than some of our neurotypical peers and colleagues and friends, okay? That is how your brain and my brain are wired. So let me say this again. You are not a robot, and I know that this comes as a complete shock and source of frustration for many. And I say that with a little humor, but also with genuine compassion for each of you who really do feel frustrated about the thought of needing time to transition, because I know it so well. I know this frustration. I know this resistance. But hear me, we are not robots. We can't work like robots or computers with no break and no transition. We need transition time for our emotional and mental state. Our nervous system needs time to shift. The human brain cannot shift instantly from one type of demanding task to something completely different. It literally does not work this way. We need transition time. And again, I swear I can almost feel the resistance from some of you as you're hearing me say this. This is one of those situations where you might need to simply chalk it up as one of those annoying parts about being human. We have a handful of them. This is one of them, because our brains need transition time. All of them do. And for ADHD brains who struggle with cognitive flexibility and transitions, this transition in and out of different activities, in and out of different cognitive states is even more challenging. We probably need even more time to shift in and out of what we're doing. That is how our brains work. And I honestly think the most critical and powerful thing you can do for yourself when it comes to navigating transitions is to start noticing how and where this is true for you in your life. Where do you need more transition time? Start noticing it without judgment. And then begin the practice of accepting those times. Because here's the truth, okay? This is going to be some real talk. Are you ready? When you hear this information that we need transition time, it is a thing that your brain will demand. It's going to take it, whether you resist it or not. Okay, so knowing this, you have a few options. Option A, you can fight this. You can fight against the fact that your brain needs transition time. You can tell yourself you should be able to shift more easily. You can keep shooting on yourself. You can continue piling more things into your schedule and compare yourself to quote unquote everyone else who seems to shift into particular activities or projects so much easier. Okay? You can try and escape that feeling of frustration and irritation by doing something else, and you might get distracted and unintentionally spend more time than necessary, because now you not only need the transition time, but you also add the extra time when we get distracted because we're trying to escape the resistance and the frustration. And now we've been on Instagram for an hour. Okay. So that's option A. We can resist this. We can just stay really frustrated about the fact that our brain needs transition time. We also have option B. Option B is that we work toward accepting the fact that our brains need a certain amount of transition time. And then we learn how much that transition time actually is. How much time does your unique brain need in different situations and with different types of activities? And then start allowing for that time. You can plan for that transition time so you have greater control over your day. You can use specific supports and strategies to help make that transition as smooth and as seamless as possible. So again, you can stick with option A. You can resist the transition time that your brain needs. You can keep adding more things to your list. You can continue expecting yourself to do more and produce more and feel frustrated because your brain is going to take that transition time whether you allow it or not. Or you can work toward creating acceptance and learn how to best support your brain, knowing that you're going to leave time for that transition time. And you can learn how to remove some of the friction so that the transitions don't feel as challenging. You can learn how to remove some of that resistance and essentially make an on-ramp into whatever work or activity you're trying to do and make sure that on-ramp is so much smoother. And the choice truly is yours. And I really hope that you hear me on that last sentence, okay? It really is a choice. And honestly, if I had heard this early on in my journey, I probably would have continued with option A because I hadn't quite accepted my ADHD yet. I still doubted whether it was true. And part of me still believed that if I just keep pushing, if I just keep trying to quote unquote fix it, I might be able to figure it out because, again, I genuinely thought I was the problem and another planner or strategy was going to, quote unquote, fix me. If you are still in that space, I see you and you're right on track. This is part of the journey. And also, if I was going back to past Paula, I would also encourage her to check in a little more often with her brain, asking, but what if it's not you? What if you don't have to just keep working harder? What if you allowed your brain to work as it does and allow space for that transition time that it needs? What if we stopped resisting this and instead put in supports to remove as much friction as possible so we can start doing the work we want to much sooner? Okay, so if you are in the space where you are resisting, again, I see you. And if possible, maybe check in every once in a while to see if the brain is a little more open to the possibility that, you know what if we need some time for transition? And how can we allow that time and make that transition time smoother and easier? Now, on the other hand, if you are leaning toward option B and you are open to accepting, okay, maybe my brain is just going to need a little more transition time than I thought. Okay, if you are there and you're ready to learn how much time your brain actually needs between the different types of activities and what types of supports can help remove some of the friction and make the process more seamless, I would love to have you join us in We're Busy Being Awesome. It is my small group coaching program for ADHD brains, and the March cohort is currently open for enrollment right now. And we begin the program on Thursday, March 7th, which is very, very soon. I believe that this episode comes out on March 4th, okay? And we start March 7th. So do not delay. We are beginning very soon. Now, if you are new to We're Busy Being Awesome or to I'm Busy Being Awesome, to the podcast space, first of all, welcome. I am super stoked you're here. And in We're Busy Being Awesome, this program is all about creating the space to first identify the areas where ADHD symptoms are keeping you stuck. Okay, we help see the sticking points, both in terms of how we can increase our effectiveness and our efficiency and ensure that we're focusing on our priorities and the things that are actually going to move the needle in our lives, whether it's personally or professionally or both. And then we dive in and we design the exact supports your brain needs for your ADHD toolkit to help you focus on your priorities and take action and check the projects off your list. In other words, inside We're Busy Being Awesome, you'll learn how to work with your brain, finish what matters, and make time to live this life that you have worked so hard to create. And because the group is currently capped at 15 people, you're not going to slip through the cracks. You won't get lost in the noise. I am there coaching every single call, every week, helping you design and implement the systems that work best for you, for your brain, and your unique season of life. As we know, No two ADHD brains are alike. Plus, as humans, we are constantly evolving and changing and entering new seasons in our relationships, situations in our personal lives, and new jobs, new career goals. And since our ADHD brains struggle with transition and change, having support throughout these different seasons can be incredibly powerful. So if you are ready to identify the supports your brain needs and start making these changes, and to do so in a supportive space with coaching and encouragement and accountability and community, I would love to have you join us in the March cohort of We're Busy Being Awesome. As a heads up, I am only offering this program twice this year, and the next time it's going to be available will be in the fall. So if you are ready to dive in and make things happen, if you are busy being awesome, I'd love for you to join us. You can tap through the link in the show notes or head to imbusybeingawesome.com/group. You can learn more about all the details and sign up directly from the website. Similarly, if you feel interested or you're curious about the program, but you also have some questions or you want to talk through what's going on for you in your current season and see if we address those areas in the program, I would love to talk with you. You can either send me an email, paula@imbusybeingawesome.com, or head to imbusybeingawesome.com/group. And at the bottom of that page, you can sign up for a time for us to chat, and we will hop on Zoom. We'll talk through any questions you have. It's a super low-key, low-stress chance for us to connect and make sure that the group is a great fit for you this season. And if not, we'll explore what other next steps you might take. Are you ready? Let's do this. You can, again, head to imbusybeingawesome.com/group. All right, my friends. Thank you for tuning in this week. And if you enjoy listening to this podcast, if you've ever had any takeaways or you've learned something that's helped you work with your ADHD, would you be a rock star and leave a review? If you're not sure how to do it, there are step-by-step instructions right there in the show notes. And I first want to say that I read every single one of these reviews and they mean so much to me. So thank you. And second, when a podcast has more 5-star ratings and reviews, it can really help new people who find the show be a little more willing to press play for the first time, because other ADHD brains have already said, yeah, this podcast is worth your valuable time. So with that in mind, I want to give some shout outs. First, to Heidi Unfiltered, who wrote a 5-star review saying episode 229 is so pure. Paula provides you with insight on how to address or handle uncomfortable emotions without feeling threatened. And then Amy Jamie? Uh-oh, I don't know how to say this name. Amy Jamie writes, one episode in and I was hooked. Simple self-improvement strategies in an accessible, neurospicy way. An ADHD must. And Elsie1211 says, I'm a new listener and I am loving every episode. I am learning many new tools and it's so nice knowing I'm not the only one navigating this world with ADHD. Truly, thank you all for making the time to listen, to tune in, to share this podcast with a friend, with a colleague, with someone else who might be navigating a distractible brain. It is your willingness to leave a review or share an episode on your Instagram stories that really helps this podcast community grow in a powerful and organic way. And it means the world to me. All of you listening, you are the reason why I keep showing up doing this podcast each and every week. So thank you for being here. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.